Girl runs away to raise money for her grandmother's surgery and ends up discovering a family secret. Emily, a 12-year-old girl, had a clear mission: to help her grandmother. That morning, she left home silently, like a ghost in search of a chance. She knew her voice was the only thing she could offer in exchange for what she needed. In the city center, she chose a busy corner and placed an old hat on the ground, hoping that passers-by would notice her presence. With a deep breath, she began to sing. Her voice, sweet and melodious, echoed through the streets, enveloping everyone around her. Emily's grandmother was sick, urgently needing surgery. Without financial resources, the girl decided to rely on her gift, hoping that people's generosity would be enough. As she sang, her mind filled with memories of happy moments with her grandmother, who had always encouraged her to sing. Emily felt a tightness in her chest at the thought of an uncertain future, but she continued to sing, each note carrying the hope of better days. The eyes of the passers-by turned to the girl with the angelic voice. Some stopped to listen, touched by the purity of her music. An elderly woman left some coins. A young student added a crumpled bill, and thus, slowly, the hat began to fill. Emily observed each gesture with silent gratitude, not interrupting her melody. Her grandmother needed her, and she was determined to do whatever it took to help. Among the people passing by, one figure stood out. Robert, a middle-aged man with a sophisticated appearance, was captivated by Emily's voice. He approached, attracted not only by the music but also by the aura of innocence and determination the girl exuded. Sitting on the sidewalk, he listened intently to every word, every note. There was something in those features that seemed strangely familiar to him, like a distant memory he couldn't immediately identify. After a few minutes, Emily finished her song with a soft note. Silence filled the street, and for a brief moment, everything seemed to be in suspense. Deeply moved, Robert stood up and walked to the hat. With a decisive gesture, he placed a $100 bill inside, causing murmurs among the curious onlookers. Emily looked at him, surprised and grateful. The money represented a chance for her grandmother, a hope she had almost lost. Robert smiled at the girl, a smile laden with nostalgia and growing curiosity. He couldn't help but notice the resemblance between Emily and someone he knew many years ago. "You sing very well," he said, trying to start a conversation. Emily, shy but thankful, nodded in appreciation. Robert was still stunned by the resemblance between Emily and Susan, his teenage love. He couldn't take his eyes off the girl, her presence evoking memories of a distant past. As Emily collected the money she had raised, Robert decided to get closer. He crouched down to her level and, in a soft voice, asked, "Your name is Emily, right? How did you learn that song?" The girl, surprised by the stranger's interest, hesitated for a moment before answering, "My grandmother taught me. She always said I had a special voice." Emily's response touched Robert in an unexpected way. He remembered Susan, who also loved to sing. The girl's eyes reflected the same passion he once saw in his old girlfriend's eyes. Intrigued, he decided to stay and listen more. He sat on the sidewalk, ignoring the crowd that began to disperse. "Your grandmother must be an amazing person," he said, trying to learn more about Emily's life. The girl nodded, a sad smile crossing her face. "She means everything to me," Emily replied, her voice soft but full of determination. As they talked, Robert felt increasingly drawn to Emily's purity and strength. She was a simple girl, but there was something special about her aura, something that made him want to know her better. He remembered Susan and how she had disappeared from his life, leaving a void that had never been filled. Now, in front of this girl, he felt an inexplicable connection. "I'd like to help in some way," he said, almost without thinking. The proposal left Emily shocked. She looked at him with wide eyes, not knowing what to say. Noticing the girl's reaction, Robert smiled warmly. "I know it must seem strange, but sometimes life gives us the chance to do something good," he said, trying to reassure her. Emily was still stunned, but there was something in the man's sincerity that made her feel safe. She took a deep breath and, in a hesitant voice, explained that she was trying to raise money for her grandmother's surgery. "She's very sick," she confessed, her voice thick with emotion. "I don't know what to do, so I decided to sing." Emily's story made Robert feel a pang in his chest. Her story seemed to echo something he already knew. Without thinking twice, he made a decision. "I'll help you and your grandmother," he declared firmly. "I'll pay for the surgery." Emily was speechless, her eyes filled with tears. She couldn't believe the generosity of this stranger. The weight of the responsibility she had been carrying suddenly seemed lighter, and a new hope began to grow within her. Emily's reaction was immediate. She began to cry, not from sadness but from a deep relief and gratitude she could barely express. Robert watched her, feeling a strange sensation. Perhaps it was fate that had led him there, to find this girl and somehow help someone in need. After the emotional encounter on the street, Robert invited Emily to a nearby cafe. The girl accepted the invitation with a shy smile, relieved to have found someone willing to listen to her story. Sitting at a table near the window, the cozy atmosphere of the place seemed to temporarily ease their worries. Robert ordered hot chocolate for Emily and coffee for himself, keeping a curious eye on the girl. He wanted to understand more about her situation and what led her to sing on the street. Emily, still recovering from her emotions, began to talk about her life with her grandmother. "My grandmother has always been very strong," she said, with a tone of respect and affection. "Ever since I was little, she took care of me and did everything she could to give me what I needed." There was a sparkle in Emily's eyes when she mentioned her grandmother, a mix of admiration and concern. Robert, intrigued, leaned forward a bit, encouraging her to continue. "She always said I had a special voice and should use it to spread joy," Emily added with a melancholic smile. Robert listened attentively, absorbing every detail. He was touched by Emily's dedication to her grandmother, especially during such a difficult time. "And how is she now?" he asked, trying to understand the situation's severity. Emily sighed, the smile fading from her face. "She's sick. The doctor said she needs surgery, but it's very expensive. We don't have the money," she replied, her voice barely a whisper. The concern in her voice was evident, and Robert felt a pang in his heart. He wanted to know more about Emily's grandmother, feeling an inexplicable connection to her story. "And what is she like? What do you like most about her?" he asked, trying to shift the topic from the illness to something lighter. Emily smiled again, this time more genuinely. "She's the kindest person I know. Despite all the hardships, she always finds a way to make me smile. We used to sing together, and she always tells me stories about when she was young," she said with a light laugh. Robert was impressed by the resilience and love emanating from Emily as she spoke about her grandmother. He felt an increasing need to help in some way, to repay the kindness the girl so greatly appreciated. "She must be an incredible person," he commented sincerely. Emily nodded, agreeing completely. "She is. I don't know what I would do without her," she replied, her tone revealing how much she depended on that maternal figure. As they talked, Robert felt a wave of empathy and compassion. Emily's determination to help her grandmother was inspiring, and he found himself increasingly committed to being a part of the story. "I want to help," he finally said with a firm voice. "Don't worry about the money for the surgery. We'll take care of it." Emily looked at him, her eyes wide with surprise. "Really? You would do that for us?" she asked, incredulous. Robert nodded with a warm smile. "Yes, I'll do everything I can to help you," he assured her. After Robert's generous offer, Emily was stunned. His words echoed in her mind like an unexpected melody. The promise to pay for her grandmother's surgery seemed like a distant dream suddenly coming true. Her eyes, already brimming with tears, finally gave way, and tears began to roll down her face. Seeing her reaction, Robert felt a pang in his heart. He reached out and touched her shoulder comfortingly. "It's okay," he said in a soft voice. "You're not alone in this anymore." Emily tried to hold back her tears, but the emotion was overwhelming. She never expected to find someone willing to help so generously and selflessly. I I don't even know how to thank you, she said, between sobs. Robert smiled and shook his head. You don't need to thank me. Sometimes people come into our lives for a reason, he commented, feeling an inexplicable connection with the girl. For him, this gesture wasn't just charity. It was a way to redeem himself and find a greater purpose. Emily's emotion seemed to touch something deep inside Robert. He, who always believed in the importance of doing good, now saw an opportunity to truly impact someone's life. You and your grandmother deserve this, he said, looking into the girl's eyes. You have a strength that's inspiring. Emily, still struggling to control her emotions, smiled through her tears. The gratitude on her face was evident, and she felt warmed by the unexpected kindness of a complete stranger. The moment was so intense that even the other customers in the cafe noticed. Some people looked on curiously, while others smiled, touched by the scene of compassion and humanity. Emily, still emotional, tried to wipe away her tears, but the feeling of relief and hope was hard to contain. She never imagined that a simple day singing on the street could lead to such a transformative encounter. My grandmother will be so happy, she murmured almost to herself, but Robert heard. He nodded, feeling that he was on the right path. As the two composed themselves, the atmosphere around them seemed to lighten. Robert knew there was much to do, but this was the first step of many. He was determined to keep his promise and do everything he could to help Emily and her grandmother. Let's start as soon as possible, he suggested, with a determined glint in his eyes. Emily agreed, still a bit incredulous about everything that was happening. To her, this man was an angel sent to change their lives. With the decision made, Robert offered to accompany Emily to her home. He wanted to see firsthand the situation in which the girl and her grandmother lived. On the way, the conversation between them flowed naturally, with Emily sharing small stories about her life and her grandmother. Robert, in turn, listened attentively, absorbing every detail. When they arrived, the sight that greeted him left him deeply moved. The house was simple and modest, with clear signs of wear. The worn facade and old windows revealed years of hardship. Upon entering, Robert was welcomed by a sense of coziness despite the evident lack of resources. The living room was small and modest, decorated with old furniture and a worn rug. Emily ran to her grandmother, who was sitting in a faded fabric armchair. "Grandma, this is Mr. Robert," she announced excitedly. The grandmother, a woman with white hair and a gentle gaze, struggled to stand up to greet the visitor. "Nice to meet you, young man," she said with a warm smile. Robert immediately felt welcomed. The conversation flowed naturally, with Emily's grandmother sharing stories about her life and how she had always done her best to care for her granddaughter. "She's a very special girl," the lady said, casting a loving look at Emily. "She's always been talented and full of life, even when things were tough." Robert could feel the pride and love the grandmother had for Emily, and it touched him deeply. He realized how much these two women meant to each other and how much the grandmother's illness weighed on them. As the conversation continued, something caught Robert's attention. On a shelf, among old objects and some picture frames, one photo stood out. He approached, curious, and his heart nearly stopped when he recognized the face in the picture. It was a young woman, smiling, next to Emily's grandmother. Robert felt the air leave his lungs, a mix of shock and nostalgia hitting him like a wave. He knew that smile, those eyes. "Is that Susan?" he asked, almost not believing it. Emily's grandmother nodded, surprised by the question. "Yes, that's my daughter," she replied with a melancholic tone. "Her name is Susan." Robert felt a chill run down his spine. The image of Susan, his teenage love, resurfaced in his mind with painful clarity. He found himself transported back to those youthful days when everything seemed possible, and dreams were limitless. The discovery left him speechless, lost in a whirlwind of emotions. He wondered what had happened to Susan, how she had disappeared from his life without a trace. Emily, noticing Robert's sudden silence, looked at him with curiosity. "Did you know my mother?" she asked with disarming innocence. Robert hesitated, trying to gather his thoughts. "Yes, I did," he replied, his voice laden with surprise and incredulity. "We were friends when we were young." The revelation hung in the air, dense and filled with unspoken meanings. Emily's grandmother watched the scene attentively but said nothing. She seemed to understand that this moment belonged to Robert. Trying to regain his composure, Robert turned his attention back to the house. "Life here hasn't been easy, I imagine," he commented, trying to steer the conversation back to a lighter tone. Emily's grandmother smiled sadly. "We do the best we can," she replied, with a serenity that touched Robert. As he left the house, Robert felt as if he were waking from a dream. The discovery about Susan, the meeting with Emily and her grandmother, all seemed like a tangled web of coincidences and fate. He knew he needed to help this family, not just because of his promise but also out of a sense of honor and personal connection. Emily walked him to the door, her eyes filled with expectation. "Thank you so much, Mr. Robert," she said sincerely. Robert nodded, still a bit dazed. "I'll do everything I can to help," he promised with renewed determination. Robert left Emily's house with his mind racing. The image of Susan, his old flame, and the unexpected revelation still left him stunned. Determined to learn more, Robert decided to return the next day to speak with Emily's grandmother. He needed to understand what had happened to Susan and uncover the truth. The grandmother welcomed him with a warm smile, inviting him in. After a few moments of casual conversation, Robert gathered the courage to ask about Susan. "I couldn't help but notice the resemblance between Emily and someone I knew a long time ago," he began, trying to find the right words. "Susan was my friend during our teenage years. I was surprised to see her in that photo." Emily's grandmother sighed deeply, her eyes revealing an old sadness. She was a free spirit, always searching for something more. The grandmother began, her voice choked with emotion. "Susan never could settle into the quiet life we led. She wanted to explore the world, live great adventures." Robert listened in silence, feeling a familiar pain. He had always known Susan's restless spirit, but never imagined she would leave everything behind. The grandmother continued, "One day, she just left. She left a letter saying she was going to Europe, chasing her dreams. Since then, we've heard nothing." The grandmother's words hung heavy in the air. Robert felt a mix of emotions: sadness, nostalgia, and a deep curiosity. "And Emily's father?" Robert asked hesitantly. The grandmother shook her head, indicating she didn't know much. "She never talked about him," she replied with an uncertain expression. "Susan was always very private about that. When she left, she just left a note saying she had to go, without giving many details." Robert felt a chill run down his spine. The possibility that he might be Emily's father began to form in his mind. The timeline made sense, and the lack of information about the girl's father only heightened his suspicions. He tried to remain calm, but the idea made him anxious. He needed concrete answers. While they talked, he noticed a hairbrush on the table, near Emily. A plan began to take shape in his mind. As Emily and her grandmother continued talking, Robert approached the table under the pretext of admiring a small collection of books. Carefully, he picked up the hairbrush, pretending to examine something on it. In a discreet motion, he removed some hair strands caught in the bristles. They were long and brown, clearly belonging to Emily. He quickly placed them in a small plastic bag he had in his pocket, trying not to attract attention. The adrenaline from the act made him feel a mix of guilt and determination, but he knew he needed to find out the truth. With the hair sample in hand, Robert felt a growing anxiety. He said goodbye to Emily's grandmother, promising to return soon. "I hope we can talk more about Susan someday," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. The grandmother smiled, nodding kindly. "Of course, it would be a pleasure," she replied, suspecting nothing. Emily, for her part, waved with a smile, unaware of what had just happened. "Thank you for everything, Mr. Robert," she said sincerely. As he left the house, Robert knew that the next step was to conduct a DNA test to confirm his suspicions. Robert spent the following days lost in thought. The idea that Emily could be his daughter wouldn't leave his mind. The resemblance to Susan, the mystery surrounding the girl's father, and the inexplicable connection he felt formed a puzzle he needed to solve. The wait for the results was agonizing. Robert spent hours reliving the past, recalling the moments he shared with Susan and imagining how his life might have been different. The possibility of having a daughter he didn't know about left him restless, and the anticipation of the test results only heightened this anxiety. He tried to distract himself with work and daily activities, but the uncertainty about the future consumed him. Finally, the day of the results arrived. With trembling hands, Robert opened the envelope sent by the lab. The words inside confirmed what he had suspected. Emily was indeed his daughter. The revelation brought a flood of emotions. He felt a mix of joy, shock, and deep sadness for the lost time. The confirmation of their blood relationship was undeniable, and with it came the responsibility and desire to get closer to Emily, to make up for the years they spent without knowing each other. As he processed the news, Robert faced a new question: how to tell Emily? He knew he couldn't just show up and reveal the truth without causing upheaval in the lives of the girl and her grandmother. He needed to find a way to approach the subject with delicacy and consideration. The dilemma of how to proceed left him unsettled, but one thing was certain: he could no longer remain a stranger in his daughter's life. The connection he felt from the first meeting was now explained by their familial bond, and he was determined to build a relationship with Emily. Robert began planning his next steps. He decided that the best way to get closer was gradually, earning the trust of Emily and her grandmother. He knew that revealing his paternity couldn't be done abruptly, so he started visiting the family more often, always bringing something useful or just spending time with them. He wanted Emily to know him not just as the man who helped pay for her grandmother's surgery, but also as someone who genuinely cared about her well-being. During these visits, Robert observed Emily with a new perspective. He saw traces of Susan in her, but also something unique that belonged only to her. He felt a growing pride for the girl who, despite all the hardships, showed strength and resilience. At the same time, the fear of how she would react to the truth haunted him. What if she didn't want to accept him as her father? What if her grandmother was outraged by the revelation? These questions kept him awake at night, but Robert knew that, at some point, he would have to face the truth and deal with the consequences. As the days passed, Robert felt that the moment to reveal everything was approaching. He was preparing emotionally for the most important conversation of his life. He knew he needed to be honest and sensitive, and that Emily's reaction could completely change the course of their lives. With each visit, he tried to learn more about the girl, her likes, dreams, and fears. He wanted to be ready to support her, regardless of how she reacted to the truth. Robert chose a quiet late afternoon and invited Emily and her grandmother for a walk in the park, a place where they could talk without interruptions. Sitting on a wooden bench under the shade of a tree, Robert looked at Emily, who was happily playing with some fallen leaves. He felt a tightness in his chest, aware that he was about to change their lives forever. Taking a deep breath, he called for their attention. "I have something very important to say," he began, his voice slightly trembling. Emily stopped playing and looked at him, curious, while her grandmother frowned, sensing the seriousness in Robert's voice. Robert tried to find the right words, but each phrase seemed inadequate to express what he felt. Finally, he decided to be direct. "Emily, some time ago I did a DNA test," he said, looking directly at the girl. "And I found out that you're my daughter." The silence that followed his statement was deafening. Emily blinked, confused, trying to understand what he had just said. Her grandmother looked at Robert with wide eyes, shocked by the unexpected revelation. The world seemed to stop as everyone processed the information. Emily was the first to break the silence. What do you mean?" she asked, her voice filled with disbelief. Robert felt his heart tighten. "I knew your mother, Susan, many years ago," he explained, trying to remain calm. "We were very close. When I first saw you, I noticed the resemblance, but I wasn't sure. So I did the DNA test, and it confirmed that you're my daughter." Each word hung in the air, laden with conflicting emotions. Emily's grandmother put her hand over her mouth, trying to absorb what was happening. "Susan never told me anything about this," she murmured, still in shock. Emily, for her part, seemed to struggle to process the information. "So, you're my father?" she asked, with a mixture of hope and confusion in her eyes. Robert nodded, feeling tears burn in his eyes. "Yes, Emily, I'm your father," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "And I'm sorry for not being in your life until now. I didn't know." Emily's reaction was a mix of emotions. She looked at her grandmother for confirmation and then turned her eyes back to Robert. "And now? What does this mean?" she asked, trying to understand the implications of this revelation. Robert reached out, hesitantly, and took her hand. "It means I want to be there for you if you'll let me," he replied sincerely. "I want to help you and your grandmother. I want to be a part of your life if you'll give me that chance." The silence that followed was heavy but full of possibilities. After Robert's revelation, Emily's life changed drastically. The girl, who once faced an uncertain future, now found herself surrounded by new possibilities. Robert fulfilled his promise to help with Emily's grandmother's surgery, and the procedure was a success. The grandmother, already in recovery, was more at ease knowing she had Robert's support in caring for Emily. The transition to this new reality wasn't easy for anyone, but gradually, they began to adapt to the new family dynamic. Robert made sure to be present at every important moment. He accompanied Emily to her grandmother's medical appointments and helped take care of her during the recovery period. More than that, he made an effort to connect with Emily in ways that went beyond material support. He took her on park outings, taught her how to ride a bike, and supported her in her studies. Slowly, trust between them grew, and Robert discovered a side of himself he had never known, that of a father. For Emily, Robert's presence brought a mix of emotions. She felt happy to finally have a father figure, but also confused and uncertain about what this meant for her future. Conversations with Robert were crucial in helping her navigate these feelings. He was always willing to listen, answer her questions, and offer the support she needed. Robert's patience and dedication began to break down the emotional barriers Emily had built over the years. With Emily's grandmother's health improving, Robert suggested they move to a larger house in a safer neighborhood with better opportunities. The grandmother, initially reluctant, eventually agreed. The move was a significant step in transforming their lives. The new house offered comfort and security, something Emily and her grandmother had not experienced for a long time. Emily got a room of her own, where she could study and develop her musical talents. Life, once filled with uncertainties, was now beginning to stabilize. Robert made sure Emily had access to quality education, something he considered essential for her future. He enrolled her in a good school and, to encourage her talent, arranged for music lessons. Emily, who had always loved singing, now had the opportunity to explore her gift more formally. With each passing day, she felt more confident and secure, knowing she had the support of her new family. The relationship between Robert and Emily's grandmother also strengthened. They developed a mutual respect and friendship that went beyond familial ties. Robert admired the grandmother's strength and resilience, while she appreciated Robert's genuine effort to redeem himself and care for Emily. Together, they formed a new family, united by circumstances and the desire to offer Emily a bright future. Emily, in turn, began to see Robert not just as the man who helped financially, but as a father who genuinely cared. The nights of conversation, the playfulness, and the moments of emotional support created a deep bond between them. Robert felt grateful for every opportunity to connect with his daughter, knowing that despite the lost time, there was still much to build. The transformation in the lives of Emily and her grandmother was evident. Robert's support and love brought a new perspective to both. Life, once marked by challenges, was now filled with hope and new possibilities. Emily, with her grandmother recovered and a dedicated father by her side, could finally dream of a promising future. And Robert, by becoming part of this family, found a new purpose, discovering that love and dedication were the keys to overcoming the past and building a better future. With Emily's grandmother's health restored and the new family dynamic solidifying, Emily's life took a promising turn. The move to a more spacious and comfortable house was a significant milestone, providing her with a safe and welcoming environment. Emily, who once dealt with life's uncertainties, now found herself surrounded by opportunities. Robert's constant presence brought stability she had never known, giving her the confidence to explore new horizons. One of the first major changes was school. Robert enrolled Emily in a prestigious institution where she could receive a quality education. The new environment was stimulating, and Emily quickly stood out as a dedicated and talented student. She loved learning and got involved in various extracurricular activities. Robert's support was crucial in this process. He encouraged her to pursue her interests and explore new areas, always present at school events and meetings with teachers. Besides academics, Emily began to develop her musical talent. The music lessons that Robert provided quickly became one of the most anticipated moments of the week. She learned to play the piano and guitar, as well as improve her vocal technique. Emily's passion for music grew daily, and she dedicated herself wholeheartedly. Robert, always by her side, watched proudly as his daughter progressed. He encouraged her to follow her dreams and not be afraid to express herself through art. The new life also brought moments of leisure and relaxation. Robert and Emily created a routine of family activities, such as park outings, trips to the movies, and even short vacations. These moments were essential for strengthening their bonds and for Emily to feel increasingly integrated into the new family structure. Her grandmother, for her part, watched everything with joy, happy to see her granddaughter thrive in a safe and loving environment. The relationship between Emily and Robert continued to evolve. The girl, who initially had reservations and insecurities, began to see Robert as a father figure in every sense. He not only supported her financially but also genuinely cared about her emotional well-being. Robert, in turn, felt fulfilled playing the role of a father. He was dedicated to being a positive presence in Emily's life, someone she could trust and turn to in times of need. Emily's grandmother also felt grateful for the transformation in their lives. The recovery of her health was a relief, and she cherished every moment with her granddaughter and Robert. They formed a new family, united by love and the desire to build a bright future for Emily. The grandmother, now more at ease, watched Emily develop in an environment full of possibilities, something she had always wished for her granddaughter. With a new perspective on life, Emily began to dream of a future that once seemed out of reach. She wanted to pursue a career in music, maybe even become a professional singer. Robert and her grandmother supported her every step of the way, encouraging her to chase her dreams. Emily's confidence grew daily, and she felt more prepared to face the challenges the future might bring. Emily's life, once marked by uncertainties and difficulties, was now a journey full of hope and new opportunities. With Robert's constant presence and her grandmother's affection, she had everything she needed to explore her talents and achieve her goals. The new perspective brought not only stability but also the chance for Emily to become everything she had ever dreamed of. And alongside Robert and her grandmother, she knew she could face any challenge and build a bright future.